Heating and AC test 16. We're talking about compressors and stuff here. All right. The first question is: normal compressor repairs include replacement of what? A, clutch coil. B, reed valves. C, shaft seal. Or all of these? Yeah, you can actually replace all of that stuff on the compressors. You know, the reed valve were the pieces I showed you on the end, the little, it's not basically a little stiff steel plate that's cut, and it goes over a thicker plate, and there's holes in the plate, and the reed valve, the air moves it, and then whenever it closes off, it can't go, makes the compressed refrigerant go only one direction, and it raises the pressure. Technician A says, all right, you guys, Technician A says when the compressor is replaced, oil levels should be checked. Technician B says the oil from the old compressor can be reused.
No.
You don't want to use the old oil. Now, I'm going to tell you this, too. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to, whenever you do this machine out here that we've got, when you, let's say that somebody comes in and you know because the compressor is short cycling that it's low on refrigerant. And what you need to know, what's one of the things you need to know from these people? I want to know some repair history. Is this a car they bought in 2005 and they've never had to have anything done to the air conditioner until right now, and it's short cycling? Whatever kind of leak it has is probably going to be so slight that you're probably, you may charge it up and it may last another 7 years. Okay, let's just assume that you're working on something like that. Now, the repair history is important. If they come to you like this guy that works up in the front in the adult education, he comes to us on his van. I talked about this briefly before, and he says, I had somebody to charge up my air conditioner, and it lasts 2 days. It lasts 2 days. And then it's empty of refrigerant again. Okay? He says, so I need you to try to find a leak for me. So what do? You got to find a leak on this thing. I need somebody to talk to me here. Come on.
Okay, you put dye in it.
You can do that, but before you put the dye in it, what are you going to do?
You're going to check the vacuum?
Well, what I want to know about, to start with, I want to look and see if I see any place where, refrigerant oil is traveling through the whole system, right? And if you see any place that's kind of greasy, probably leaking air, right? Yeah. Okay, secondly, on his, we basically pulled we identified the refrigerant first. Then we pulled the refrigerant out, and it was supposed to hold like 2.5 pounds, and it only had 1 pound in it. Right. Okay. Then we charged it back up. And if you're going to use a refrigerant leak detector or anything like that, you can actually take and turn off all your fans. Everybody listen, this is important. Now, if I don't tell you this, you're going to look like a dummy. Turn off all the fans. And this stuff's heavier than air, right? So if you walk away and you let it sit there over lunch, then you're going to see refrigerant. I mean, refrigerant's going to be puddled in the low places. But you can't have air moving because it'll blow it out of there. All right, so you're going to sniff around with your sniffer. We found his leak, long story short, this big suction pipe that was going back to the evaporator in the rear. And it was in a place where the suction pipe has got this sort of a fitting like this. I mean, it's a crimp fitting. You seen them crimp fittings like that?
Yep.
And it had a aluminum pipe coming out, and it had a rubber hose coming in here. Right? You seen that before? It was leaking right here, and it was making a bubble about the size of the head of a pin about every 60 seconds. That's how slow that thing was leaking. That was the only leak it had, as far as we knew now. But it would make you'd see, this was greasy here, and you'd see a little bubble about every 60 seconds form in there. And we actually sprayed a little bit of soapy water. Now, that's not always the best way to do it, but you can find them that way sometimes. Now, something else we like to do, and I'm going to show you guys this when we, get to it. We can take a nitrogen bottle, a compressed nitrogen bottle that's got an AC regulator connected to it. We can actually change the amount of pressure that this regulator is putting in there. We can empty the system of refrigerant. 78% of what we're breathing out here is what?
Nitrogen.
Okay, so we're going to take nitrogen. Ain't hurting a doggone thing as far as environmental stuff. And we're going to put about 150 pounds of nitrogen pressure on this system. And then we're going to soap bubble it just to see what we can do. Now, there's, like I say, the real sticklers for air conditioner work are saying, oh, this is not a good way to do this, and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. But if you got some pretty high nitrogen pressure on it, you're going to see those bubbles. Right? All right. So, anyway, we replaced that line. Greg did it, by the way. And on that Dodge Caravan.
Oh, yeah, that's the one he trying to get me to do.
And that thing was actually, that was when Greg was here, was a long time. You know, he did that the last time. We may not have been teaching air conditioning, maybe a special topics project, but the point is, it was a while back. And that thing's still cooling. He's never had any more leak.
He tried to get Hunter to do that one time.
But the point I'm telling you is, every 2 days, I mean, it would lose enough refrigerant where in 2 days the whole charge was gone to the point where it wouldn't cool. And that little tiny bubble.
Cool.
You remember what we did to this other lady, and we're talking slow leak stuff. She had this refrigerant leak that would take, initially what we did a long time ago, she says, about every 3 or 4 months my refrigerant goes away. And this was in that 98 Buick that we just worked on and put that tensioner on and everything. All right, and so Frank was here then, the ex-Army guy that, you know, Desert Storm dude and all this. He was about 50 years old, black man. He was really good. And he ran it we put the dye in it. He ran it, and the dye that he saw was coming out the evaporator drain. You shine your black light on the water that's dripping out the evaporator drain, and it's got dye in it. What does that mean? That means the evaporator's leaking. We were talking the other day. Where's the evaporator? I actually had some deer in the headlight students that couldn't tell me where the evaporator was. It made me think I hadn't been doing my job right. You know, there's some stuff I've known so long, I think everybody knows it. The evaporator's in the dash. It's always in the dash, you know. I mean, it's got or sometimes it'll be in a housing out here under the hood, but it's going to always have access to the inside, like on Ford pickups is out here under the hood. But anyway, so we put an evaporator in it, and it did better, but it still had a slow leak. So I made sure that it had plenty of dye in it, you know, and, you know, use the approved dye. And she drove it for a whole year. And when it came back, I said, we put dye in this the last time it was in here, so we need to be looking at it with our black light and see what we see. And as soon as Chelsea put that light down there, that compressor lit up like a Christmas tree. So there's an O-ring where that compressor is put together, and it was leaking around that O-ring. Now, we went ahead and replaced the compressor because we got one from Ranchu. It didn't cost all that much. But the fact is that this leak-finding business, the single most irritating thing you're going to have to deal with when you're working on air conditioners, in most cases, is having to find a slow leak. And if it takes 2 or 3 weeks for that to be gone, you know, it could be evaporator, it could be compressor, it could be a line, it could be an O-ring. And one of the first things that we typically like to do is take every joint apart on that thing that's got an O-ring in it and replace every dadgum O-ring on it before we do anything else. That doesn't cost a lot. Takes some time. There's some labor involved.
Oh, wait, I'm
Yeah, it doesn't take, well, on some cars it takes more than others, but the fact is if you do that, a lot of the time you'll get it. But once you've eliminated all those joints where the O-rings are, then you can focus on your condenser, your evaporator, and your compressor, and the lines in between there. And that's when you're going to pay real close attention to those. Anyway, the long and the short of it is, when you're pulling the refrigerant out, you need to be watching that oil bottle on the side of that machine to see how much oil comes out whenever it gets to the draining oil part. On some of them, it won't drain any oil. On some of them, it'll drain 2 ounces. You don't ever know. If you're not watching that bottle, let me tell you, this lady had this 2005 Taurus, and it was, the air conditioner the refrigerant kept getting gone out of it. We're in air conditioner class, so we're spending some time on this. We're coming up on the end of the semester. I don't want to be forgot to tell you something important. You understand what I'm saying?
Yep.
Okay, she keeps going by the dealership. I don't know which Ford dealership it was, but it was a Ford dealership. And they were frustrated by this slow leak syndrome thing. Couldn't figure out what was leaking. So they pulled the refrigerant out of it. And, you know, the only accurate way you can charge one up, really, is to pull all the refrigerant out that's in there after you've identified it and then put a proper charge back in there. If you pull out a pound and it takes 2.2, then you're going to charge her for 1.2 pounds because your machine's going to recycle it. We're not letting it out into the air, okay? You pull it into your machine, you measure it, you put it back, you got a charger for 1.2 pounds plus your labor for doing it. All right, so they had done this about a half a dozen times. And you know what happened after they did it a half a dozen times? The compressor locked up. Because every time they pulled it out and put the stuff back in, they pulled a little oil out. And they never put any oil back in it. And so they fried the compressor. So we got a compressor and put it in there without enough oil. Now, most of you guys know, if you've done this kind of stuff, and we've talked about it, if you're replacing the accumulator, your book is going to tell you, if you put an accumulator on it, you need to add this many ounces of oil. If you put a compressor on it and there's no oil, it's another consideration is when you get a compressor out of the box,
Fill it up with oil.
you don't know if it's got oil in it or not. It'll tell you if it's got oil in it. If it says it's shipped with oil, it'll tell you it's got oil in it. And some of the guys,
Most of them don't.
some of them do, some of them don't. Also, what you're supposed to do is read the paper that's in the box. You hear me? Everybody listening, read the paper that's in the box. I know how much us guys all like to throw the paper away and just fly in there and do this stuff. You know what I'm saying? But read the paper that's in the box, because that box is going to tell you, it says, there's oil in this compressor. Even after you put oil in it, stand the compressor on its nose for 5 minutes. Turn the hub and stand it on its nose again. And basically what you're doing is you're getting that seal ready. You don't want that seal to fire up dry. You know what I mean? And it's going to make it seal better. Okay, you got that. Now listen to what I'm telling you here. This is good stuff. All right, now then, when you put your compressor on there, make sure that all if you replace the evaporator, or if you replace the condenser, or if you whatever, that your book is going to tell you for each one of these components add this much oil. Now the reason I'm telling you that is if you just throw the parts on there, charge it up refrigerant, and send them on their way, you can put too much oil in there and it'll coat the inside of those parts and they won't cool or flip. And it's very difficult to diagnose that. You got it? All right, now let's move on here. When the compressors replace oil level should be checked. How do you check the oil level?
By running the machine.
Do they got a dipstick in the accumulator? If you're replacing the compressor, you're going to need to replace the accumulator in the orifice anyway. If it's got an expansion valve on it, you really ought to put one of those on there too. Now, some people don't put an expansion valve every time. Some people, because sometimes the expansion valve's under the dash. It's hard to get to on some of these Toyota Camrys and stuff. But you need to make darn sure that you replace the orifice tube, which ain't hard to replace, and put a dryer on it. If it's a receiver dryer, which is the little one, or if it's the big one. If you replace the compressor, that's got to be replaced because it's kind of like a filter. If there's a lot of trash in the system because the compressors come apart, you better deal with that. You can either put a little screen there at the suction line to catch the metal so it doesn't go in there, or you can there's other filters you can put in there. But you definitely need to flush the system. Make sure there's not any metal particles. This is all stuff that I'm making doggone sure that you know before we, get in trouble. All right. So that second one is going to be A. Now the third one, technician A says as the drive hub is replaced, the air gap should be checked at 3 different places. Technician B says the air gap is not important as long as the clutch ohms are correct. That is an A. How many ohms does the clutch usually have? You got any idea? It ain't got many. 2 or 3? And, all right. Technician A says, now everybody knows about the clamping diode, right? Remember the clamping diode? The clamping diode.
Diode like that thing that makes the electricity only go one way.
Yeah, it does. The diode is, but what you're talking about here, your compressor, it's got this big winding, right? And it got power coming in here, and the ground is, on that side, whatever. All right. Now, right in here, you're going to put a diode. Why would you do that? Whenever that magnetic field collapses, when you open that magnetic field and that compressor coil collapses, do you know what comes screaming out of that thing? 400 volts. Out of that compressor coil.
I didn't know that.
It's a 400 volt spike that comes screaming out of there. Now, I worked on a bucket truck that belonged to Daleville Cablevision. It was a brand new bucket truck they had just bought. And the hydraulics on a bucket truck have to be driven by some kind of power takeoff. It'll either be a power takeoff that's on the side of the transmission. This one there had a compressor style AC clutch that was mounted on a hub that was made for a power takeoff that was driven by a belt. You know, just added over there. All right, and so they had a little switch in here, and I'm telling you the end of the story before I tell you the beginning of the story. They had a little switch in there where you turn that thing on, and whenever you turned it on, they didn't have this diode in there. And if they happen to be listening to the radio, and it was just a plain old AM/FM radio, but this truck was brand new, it's still under warranty. Every 30 days, we were having to put another radio in it.
In front.
Because that 400-volt spike was screaming back past the ignition switch over the radio and going bam and punching the radio silly. And after a while, the radio was just dead. It couldn't do anything. It was. Do you know how I found that? I mean, because they said the people on the other side of the shop have put about 4 radios in this truck, and we need you to find out what's going on with these radios. And so I took my oscilloscope and I hooked to the power wire going into the radio, and I started looking for stuff they had added, and I said, well, this is that power takeoff. And when I flipped it off and back on, my oscilloscope spiked off the chart. And I said, well, this must be what the deal is. Now, the way I fixed that was I went to Radio Shack, and I got a diode, which the Radio Shack from diode. The diode from Radio Shack is going to look like this. It's going to be a little black thing with a stripe on it like that. This whole thing's black, so it's got a white stripe. And I put it in there. Now, if you put it backwards, it'll blow the fuse every time you try to turn the clutch. But if you put it the right way, it causes that spike that's coming out of there to chase its tail and just go away. And even on your little relays, like we got right here, if you look on these relays, the little schematic on the side of that relay, usually, this Bosch one doesn't show that, but they'll usually show you a little resistor. They don't use a diode in a relay because you could plug it in the opposite way. But they use a little resistor for that same reason that's wired parallel with the coil in the relay. All right. Now that I've, got your feet wet on that. Now let's move on. The air gap is doggone important. I told you about if everything else is right, and that air gap, every time that clutch kicks in, is wearing a little metal off. And over a period of time, that air gap can wear out to the point where there's enough of a gap where it won't even pull the clutch in. And I can demonstrate out here on the bench. I got a setup for doing that. All right, now then, Technician A says, it's important to position snap rings correctly when replacing clutch parts on a compressor. To begin with, it's important to install the snap rings. Don't forget and leave them off, right? Let's see. Technician B says the whole clutch assembly should be replaced if the pulley bearing fails. What about that? Now, let me tell you this. You cannot replace bits and pieces of clutches. In other words, you cannot replace the pulley and use a different hub that's already been burnished and wore in with another, because it won't even, if it'll try to engage, but it'll slip. It's got to be a really good solid. Now, what I did, I cheated the other day on that Bronco. We took the compressor clutch off of another one because you remember the little spline shaft with different sides. We took one that would fit, and I had a pulley and I had a hub that were made to go together when they were new, but they were mismatched. And I laid those things on the bench, and I took the sanding disc and I smoothed them suckers off real pretty. And when I did that, it grabbed and ran. So the AC on the Bronco works now because of that. We actually put a compressor clutch in it. The compressor clutch in that one was totally shot. All right, let's go and see if we can move faster on this because I'm holding Wes up. He's got to go to work. All right. Did you put that timing belt on?
Yeah.
How long did it take you?
It's paid me 6.8 hours and then 3.
Done it in 3. Oh my goodness! 6.8 hours times $28 an hour is what?
A lot. Like $200 something. Yeah, it's like 180 almost.
Yeah, so he made that much money in 3 hours.
But I had to replace the valve cover gasket and all that stuff.
Oh, so that was, you actually would have just been through the timing belt probably in 2 hours.
Well, that was all to
part of the job.
Yeah. Timing belt.
The faster you do it, the better off you are. Okay, let's move on.
And Michael had a tool to where we didn't have to take anything off. So.
Yeah, Michael was happy with you on that one, wasn't he? Technician A is the one that's right about that. I don't know if I agree with that or not. If the pulley bearing fails, I guess you could probably put a bearing in there, but by that time the dadgum clutch is shot anyway. So don't go in there with the idea that that's a good answer because I don't think it is. The clutch must be removed and replaced. I'll tell you something else. Let me tell you this. Sometimes that bearing will lock up and you won't even be able to start the motor. Told you about that before.
The engine?
Yeah. I mean, that bearing in that compressor clutch will seize up, and that belt has got enough traction around that big old pulley to where it'll sound like you got a bad starter or something. Donk, 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 donk. Yeah.
Well, my friend, I thought about that. One of my friends was saying he needed a starter. When he cranks up, it kind of sounds like he does. But he went to advanced, and the dude told him it didn't sound like a starter. He couldn't tell him what it sounded like, but it wasn't a starter. But it sounds like when he turns it over, it's like you know how the one-way clutch, if it's like gone or messed up, it sounds like it's like he's holding a starter, but he ain't.
Yeah, it sounds like he's got a starter drive. That one-way clutch is bad in the starter drive. It's unusual, though, for the guy at Advance not to sell him a starter.
But he also
with all due respect to Advance, yeah.
has problem. His AC doesn't work either, so that's why I was wondering if that could be a problem.
Yeah, you need to. I mean, if you need to see if that's related. But this sound that you're talking about is going to be related to nothing except maybe the overrunning clutch in a starter that's loud.
That's what I think.
Yeah. I mean, I'd get the starter off and I'd be looking at things. You know, that's how you do that. You can think about and talk about something until you're blue in the face, but until somebody puts some wrenches on it, you're not going to find the starter. Yeah. You can do voltage drop tests, but if you're hearing a strange mechanical sound, you're just going to do a visual inspection on that. The clutch has got to be removed and replaced to do what?
Both.
That's going to be a B, to get access to the compressor shaft seal. Technician A says the shaft seal parts should be well lubricated as they're installed. Technician B says the special tools are often required to remove and replace the seal parts. That's number 6. That's going to be a C. Now, the compressor shaft seal is not typically something that most places replace much anymore, you know. I mean, we did that whenever I was at the dealership. Most of the time, if the compressor shaft seal is leaking, all the times they'll just put a compressor on it. But that's fairly pricey at most shops, so.
Yeah, it's like $500 for a compressor.
Yeah, it is, depending on the compressor. Some compressors are nearly $1,000. You know, they're pretty high. So, if you can get the seal, it's not a bad idea to replace it. But you know,
Yeah.
all right. Technician A says, Technician A says the oil level in an AC compressor can be checked at any time. Is that guy right about that? No. Technician B says the system must be empty before checking the oil level. Well, obviously, you don't want a refrigerant going and spray it out
Yeah,
there.
but I mean, you can't really check the whole level.
It's just very difficult to do that if there's one of the things that we would do is, I've seen the guys that I worked with that did air conditioner work and were specialized in it. When they were pulling the compressor and the accumulator off, they would have it in a container and they would pour out what was in there to see how much oil was there. That's about the only way you can do that. You can check it, but you just about got to have the parts off so you can pour the stuff out.
Right.
That's been my experience.
So which one is this one?
Where it's not a dipstick. If you're going to get this one here right, according to the answer key in this book here, basically you're going to be a B there. Yeah. Technician A says the oil level, when a compressor is replaced, it's a good practice to also replace the what?
See?
I would say both A and B. You know what I'm saying? Excuse me. That's a dumb answer. I just gave you a goofy. I was thinking, A and C. Receiver dryer is what you need to replace, but C would be right on that one, not D. What a dummy. They were saying thermal expansion valve, orifice tube. You can't replace both of those because it should typically. Is it possible for a vehicle to have a thermal expansion valve and an orifice tube on it? Yes, if it's got rear air. The rear air will have an expansion valve and the front will have an orifice tube, so that's a caveat. Let's see how quick we can make our way through these next ones. Technician A says you must install the compressor and charge the system to check for seal leaks. Technician B says if you apply pressure to a compressor discharge port, pressure will show up immediately at the suction port. Who is right about that? Neither one of those guys is right. Why won't the pressure show up at the suction port if you apply pressure at the discharge port? Because the reed valves are pointing the wrong way for it to do that. They're going to stop it from going there, okay? Technician A says most leaks at line fittings can be stopped by tightening the fitting nut a little tighter. Technician B says line fitting O-rings should be properly positioned and lubricated with a drop of refrigerant oil as they're installed. Who's right about that? That's B. I'm going to tell you something that's irritating to me about air conditioner stuff is you go over here with your fancy wrenches And you can put it on these lines sometimes. Let's say the orifice tube, like on a Chevrolet pickup, and I've seen this on some 90s Chevrolet pickups, the orifice tube is in the liquid line right after it leaves the condenser out there behind the grill. You got to pull the grill off the truck, and that's okay. The grill ain't hard to pull off the truck. So we've actually gone out there and we put our wrenches on them two fittings, and they will not come off. They are galled together, and you got to replace the doggone condenser, which is expensive. So you got to put a condenser on it, and then you got to put that line on it, and so on and so forth. So it can be. This is a blind side. You know, the customer sometimes won't understand that, but when you tell them, hey, it's not coming apart, we're going to put a condenser on it, you know.
They get mad.
Number 11, a new hose can be made up in the shop by installing the correct ends onto the right size, type, and length of hose. Is that true? That is true. You can make air conditioner hoses if you got the fittings. Okay. Number 12, Technician A says new refrigerant oil should be added to new components, such as accumulators or condensers, as they are installed. Okay. What do you think about that one? Technician B says 2 wrenches should be used when tightening most line fittings. See, both of those guys are right. When replacing an air conditioning component, all of the following are true about the refrigerant oil except one. The oil is removed during refrigerant recovery should be measured. I told you about that earlier. The old oil should be drained from the component and measured. The oil charge stamped on the compressor should be added to the system. The old oil should be replaced with fresh oil. That sounds like a bunch of good answers, don't it? Yeah. Well, yeah, it is C, but I don't really like that question because, well, it says except. Excuse me. The oil amount is on a is not on the compressor. Typically, it's going to be on a sticker somewhere else. So that's going to be except. Everything was right except for that one there. That except thing just kind of mess you up if you ain't paying attention. Technician A says use caution when removing O-rings so they may be reused.
No.
Technician B says PAG oil can be used to lubricate O-rings only in systems. It's a big, long word.
What is
about
it?
that long. It's the kind of oil that you're going to use in typically, when it's air conditioner.
So he's right.
And it was, the ester oil. All right, do a PAG oil search on your phone and see what you can research on that right quick. PAG oil. Say, what is PAG oil? And then tell me what it is. Tell me what you come up with. You'll remember it better that way. Which of the following is not true about compressor seal service? New seals may require running the compressor to seat properly. Always remove the compressor from the vehicle and replace the seal. Touching the seal with your fingers may damage it. Always recover the refrigerant before you replace the seal, which is not true.
Would be A.
Yeah, that's going to be actually B. Always remove the compressor. You don't have to always remove the compressor. If you can get to it, you can replace it. Like on that Ranger, it's right up on top. The clutch ain't hard to pull. Which of the following is the most common cause of compressor failure? That's going to be B. Inadequate lubrication. I can't believe I was starting to say seal failure. Inadequate lubrication. Inadequate lubrication. Okay. Technician A says front seal replacement.
It was used in R12.
Huh?
Used in R12.
It's old PAG. It's the PAG.
What's it stand for, though?
Yeah, it's a big long word about that long.
Polyammonia scrap.
Like,
Can you spell it?
yeah, POLYAL.
Let's spell it. Hold on. POLY
ALK
ALK
Y